Adela, you must have had mental telepathy that you knew in 2019 how this would be the world today. I read that in 2019 you filed a complaint against NYU with respect to anti-Semitism. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a long story, but back in 2019, in my senior year of college, there was so much anti-Semitism. It started with the typical things you see on college campuses across the U.S., right? BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement against Israel, anti-Israel professors boycotting Israeli academics.
In 2019, this
2019. We're talking, it started even earlier. From my freshman year, we were having problems, but it got so bad to the point that after one anti-Israel student assaulted and battered a Jewish girl, and they burned Israeli flags, tore them to shreds, and hung them from trees, and got arrested for it by NYPD, the school actually gave an award to the group that spent 2 years harassing the community.
In a New York City school.
In a New York City school. This is New York University. So after a while, and we'll walk through how I got to this point, but I made the decision to sue NYU, and at the time it was something that was pretty unheard of, using Title VI of the Civil Rights Act for anti-Semitism, because it only protects nationality, race, and ethnicity, not religion. So when I wanted to sue, the lawyers told me it would be an uphill battle, and they essentially told me it would be a PR suit. They said, it's not going to get you anywhere. And it ended up having super huge consequences, impacts, and right now my suit is basically the groundwork for all the cases we're seeing today against Cooper Union, Columbia, MIT, Harvard. All of those cases are because I figured out how to use Title VI for anti-Semitism.
Tell us the Donald Trump story. I think I've heard you speak at an IDF event last week with Jill Zarin. Thank you very much. And you spoke to the audience. You could hear a pin drop. You always know somebody's a good speaker when you hear nothing. Literally, you had a crowd of 100 people, nothing. I was like, you have to come on the Miller Report. So I want you to tell our viewers and our listeners again what happened. How did Donald Trump find out about you, and why were you sent to the White House?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So pretty much my senior year, I decided to file this case, right? And remember, the law would not be on my side, so I knew it would have to be about getting the word out there as much as possible. So I filed my case. The vice president of NYU heard about it, and he had been avoiding meeting with me for weeks and weeks and weeks. So
what do you mean avoiding meeting with you?
So after, basically after all the anti-Semitism, after the arrests, after the flag burning, not only did NYU not do anything to combat anti-Semitism, after I met with them multiple times, multiple administrators in multiple departments, they actually gave an award, the President's Service Award, to Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP, the group that spent 2 years harassing the community. So once that award was given, I tried to meet with the vice president to pretty much ask, how did this happen? How were they selected? Who was in charge of this? My community feels like you're glorifying violence against Jews because that's what you're doing. And he refused to schedule a meeting with me. That's what made me decide to file my case. And once I did file, the vice president of NYU called me and asked me to come into his office. And instead of coming in to talk about my community being scared and angry, no, I came in with a calendar and I said, here's every time I met with you over the last 2 years.
For 2 years, you tried to meet with him. Let's just understand this. And he would not meet with you until you filed a lawsuit.
Yeah, well, he would meet with me. For the first year, he met with me almost every week. Okay. And then he promised me action after the flag burning, the arrests, the assaults. And then I kind of dropped off the grid, right? I left student government. I left my positions in leadership. I said, I'm a student, but I don't want to be in this activism space. I started taking creative writing and dance. I really just wanted to graduate and finish. I was a Middle Eastern Studies major, so I couldn't even go to my classes anymore. My professors arranged for me to take my exams separately. It was a really bad environment for me. And in that year where NYU promised action, they instead gave the award, right? So yeah, I understand the schools saying they were going to take action. I understand them wanting to do it quietly behind the scenes. But to proactively give an award that didn't have to be given, in that moment, NYU was saying to become an award-winning group, you just pick a minority community, protest their offense, assault their members, burn their flags, and get arrested for it. And so long as that group is Jewish, it's not alarming, it's rewarded, right? So I made the decision to file. Thank God I graduated. They gave me my diploma. And then I spent 3 months, that whole summer, just making publicity for my case, speaking wherever I could. And I came upon Elon Carr, the envoy against anti-Semitism. So
he was part of the Trump administration.
Yes. So the Trump administration had created a position called the Ambassador Against Anti-Semitism. And it was the first position of its kind. It was, again, a momentous thing. When he did create it, I remember the Jewish community saying, like, wow, it's finally as if someone cares about us. And Elon is wonderful. He is from LA. He's a Persian Jew. He's had history in Congress. You know, he really is a great figure for this. And he heard me speak at a conference, and he said, I'm going to take your information because I think this is going to go somewhere. Wow. And then I was going to speak at a conference in Miami. And, you know, about 2-3 weeks before the conference, I get a call that says restricted Washington, D.C. 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, by the way. This was so outside of work hours. I don't know why I answered the call, but they told me they were calling from the White House. They said that the president had heard about my case. So at that conference I was speaking at, he was going to be the keynote, and they asked if I'd be willing to come on stage with him, have him introduce me, and have me talk about my lawsuit.
I love it. That's fantastic. So you are so familiar with this. I mean, we're going to get into what's happening today, but I guess you have a bird's eye view of what we have an election coming up. I call it the Super Bowl year of politics because there's just so much going on. If you had to just pick between President Biden and Donald Trump right now on behalf of one party voting, one issue voting, let me say, who would you vote for?
So it's a complicated question. If you ask me for the United States between a Trump and a Biden presidency, I'll take Trump. But my concern is that Trump has historically been good for Israel, and I'm really grateful about that and for everything he's done for the Jewish community. But what people aren't really talking about is that Netanyahu and Trump have some issues with each other. So while historically Trump has been good for Israel and good for the Jewish people, right now I'm not really sure if his election would be helping Israel if Netanyahu's in power. So it's going to have to take one of them to tone their ego down, hopefully both of them. But if one of them doesn't tone their ego down, then I don't know if a Trump presidency would actually be good for Israel. But I do want to say, I don't think a Biden presidency is real. I think that Biden right now is the democratic institution. And the democratic institution, which is more of an oligarchy than a presidency, has been calling the shots. Right? So I don't think that President Biden makes decisions on his own. So it's just a matter of, do you want the democratic institution in charge, or do you want President Trump, who stands for no institution? You know, he might be the Republican nominee, who knows? But I don't think that he is a team player in that. So this is, again, like you said, Super Bowl of elections. Right. No one knows what's going on. And it's funny you called it a Super Bowl because in Super Bowls, it's very weird to have a new team matchup. So the fact it's a rematch, you know.
It may not be. I bet with people that it's not going to be Biden.
We'll see. We'll see. You know, I'm not a U.S. citizen, so I can't vote. So I'm just speculating here.
How do you think President Biden is handling Israel right now regarding Iran? Because it was President Trump, former President Trump, that was the first one that said, and I heard this, that when this first started after October 7th, he came out and said, this is Iran. And we're still getting oil from Iran. He stopped the sanctions, our current president. Are you paying attention to that? And what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that when it comes to Iran, people have to realize that the wars today in the 21st century, everything is fought through proxy wars, right? So when it comes to China, the U.S., that's fought through Taiwan. When it comes to Russia, U.S., that's fought through Ukraine. So Iran, U.S., naturally is being fought through Israel, right? And I think that it took people a very long time to realize and to take a step back and realize, you know, I'm very connected to the cause. I am Jewish. I'm a Jewish activist. This is my life, right? So I was looking at this really pigeonholed until I took a step back and I said, Israel's not special. Right? Israel's support, the U.S. support for Israel shouldn't be special because this is the proxy war, the next of the proxy wars on the list. Actually, the last of the proxy wars on the list, right? We already had China, we already had Russia, and now we're with Iran. And whenever I speak to my friends that are not connected to Israel, right, who are usually on the right wing, who are very isolationist, right? They're very America first. And we see eye to eye on almost, you know, on a lot of issues. But here they specifically do not support U.S. support to Israel because they say, you know, why are you know, the Middle East, we lose security. It's the only true ally of the Middle East. Even in Egypt, right? Egypt is a U.S. ally, but is it really, right? So Israel's the only country in the Middle East that's wholly aligned with the United States, right? Taiwan was strategic economically, right? All of our microchips, every single piece of technology that's worth something in the U.S. is being produced in Taiwan, right? Ukraine was more of a, you know, it's more of an oil fight. That's what's going on there. It's more about Russian power, and that's more of an ideological fight. That's less concrete than Taiwan microchips, right? And now here, Israel, this is pure security, This is pure security. If the U.S. does not support Israel, Israel loses support. The U.S. is losing security in the Middle East. And I think that when it comes to Biden's relationship with Iran, I think he's very soft. And I think it's because it's not him. I think, again, the shots are being called by other people, and he's the mouthpiece. And he's a weak mouthpiece. I think it's the institution. I think it's an oligarchy. I really think it's, if I imagine it in my mind, I imagine a big conference table full of the Democratic Party, the Democratic institution, deciding what they're going to do. And then they tell Joe Biden, hey, look, this is what we're going to do, okay? And then he goes out, makes a speech that is maybe 2.5 minutes long, where he slurs half his words, and then he goes back home. And that's why I just cannot understand why the Democratic Party wants to run Joe Biden. Run anyone else.
I don't think they are. That's I'll say
I
that on record.
I don't think so either. I'll set that on record too.
So what do you think about the Obamas? How involved are they? And are they the mouthpiece here?
I think, everyone's favorite speculation. The comment I get most often on Instagram and things like that is, she's a paid Zionist. She's paid by the Zionist entity. Show me the receipts. I'd like to see me be a paid Zionist. Who's paying me to say what I say on social media? Absolutely no one. I can guarantee that. So it's funny how this idea of a paid protester, great, sign me up.
So you agree with it?
That it's being paid? 100%. 100%. I think that what you need is that, it's human nature.
Wait, let's back up. I'm sorry. By who?
By who?
Who's paying?
Oh, I have some theories. When it comes specifically to those protesters, I think it's about destabilizing the U.S. There's two different kinds of paid protesters right now. I think that there are those that are funded by Qatar, which are all about, support for Hamas and terrorism and destabilizing the U.S. from that side. But when it comes to the same phases showing up that are Antifa, you have to look at taking a step back, right? The three main rivals of the United States are Iran, Russia, and China. Have you heard of the app TikTok? This is my favorite thing to talk about. I talk about this all the time. I have TikTok. I had TikTok. Now I, put it aside for a bit. But TikTok was meant to destabilize the U.S. It feeds people on the algorithm videos that polarize them or rot their brains. Meanwhile, TikTok in China shows videos of young people playing in concerts and young people solving math equations. So their kids are also on TikTok, but the content they're getting is how to be a model citizen that contributes to society.
Wait, I need to go back, Adela.
Yes.
You're saying that TikTok, the social media, was derived to bring down democracy?
Yes, and I'll explain how I have proof of this. Actually, not proof, everything is empirical, but during COVID, right? I want to get to the first 3 months of COVID, June. COVID started in March, arguably June was the 3-month mark. That was also the time that George Floyd protests started going on. That's when BLM really took hold. I have 2 younger sisters. We were all raised in the same household, and both of them have TikTok. They're both Gen Z. And one is relatively liberal and one is relatively conservative. And for me, I started looking through my TikTok, and the only thing it would show me was videos of, number 1, children, and number 2, of artificial insemination, and number 3, how artificial insemination was the greatest decision of their lives, which is a single-parent household, right? Because all my friends, 3 months into COVID, started announcing their pregnancies. That's just what happened naturally. Right. So suddenly, I started talking to my mom about potentially artificial insemination. My mom says, Adela, you are crazy. What are you talking about? I'm like, Mom, I'm ready to be a mom. I'm ready to start my life. I don't need a man in my life. I could do this on my own. My mom's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I could do this by myself. And we got into this argument, and I went back to my room, and because I was living with my mom during COVID, just, to keep her company. And I opened my phone, and the first video I see is someone saying, artificial insemination was the greatest decision in my life, and here's why. And I'm like, wait, I'm being fed content. So at that moment, I asked both my sisters to come downstairs, and we placed our phones on the table. And I said, at the count of 3, all of us open our TikTok. We all hit TikTok at the same time. I had TikTok for about a week. TikTok barely knew me at this point, but I already understood that all my friends are having children and I am not, right? We all open our TikTok. Mine showing me videos of babies. My sister, who is relatively liberal, was saying, get up and protest because of the injustices against the Black community. And my sister, who's conservative, said, get up and protest because of the destabilization of the United States and stand your ground. So pretty much TikTok is rotting my brain and distracting me into single motherhood and taking my 2 sisters who were raised in the same household with the same values and taking them to go out to the streets on completely polar ends. And this is just in one household. And that was the first time I took a step back and I said, what is this app about? So to go back to your question about who is paying these protesters, why is it the same faces that we see at protest after protest after protest? Number one, people are lazy. They don't have real jobs. Number one. So they could go out and protest. Why can you go out and protest? Because you have nothing better to do. You have no responsibilities. You already take these people who are angry, disassociated, disillusioned.
They don't even know what they're protesting
They don't even know what
about.
they're protesting. You give them a cause. And if you give any sort of economic incentive, there you go. Perfect storm. It doesn't matter who's paying them. Whoever's paying them is the person that wants us distracted and divided. And that's China, Russia, and Iran. This is no different.
Let's talk about the schools. Who's funding the schools?
Who's funding the schools? This is always a fun topic. Over the last 20 years, Qatar alone has given over $4.7 billion to U.S. colleges.
How do we know that? How do we know that's not another conspiracy thing?
Oh, it could be a conspiracy. No, there's multiple studies on this, and actually the studies mainly came out before October 7th. There's a huge study published in 2019, actually, that tracks the money. It's called Where is the Money? I can't remember the exact name. It's the Institution for Anti-Semitism and Social something. And they go through pretty much all of the numbers. And they show you that the number 1 is Qatar. After them comes Saudi, and then comes the UAE. And then they have smaller countries like Kuwait and things like that come in with, a couple $100 million, but not quite at the point of $1 billion. And it's, from that point also, and they started, the study started in 2012, continued until 2019. It was a 7-year study, but they were able to track payments all the way back to 1980, and then the next large wave of payments to 2001, late September. Do you know what happened in September 2001?
Yeah.
Okay. Lovely. So after that, you start seeing, after September 11th of 2001, you start seeing Middle Eastern countries start opening sister campuses in the Middle East. And they said that they did
hospitals.
And hospitals.
Yes.
They said they did it to avoid brain drain, right? Because the greatest brains in the Middle East were going to study in the United States, and some of them took their talents elsewhere and would stay there, and brain drain is a true concern. So they said, well, we'll open, a chapter of Carnegie Mellon in Qatar. We'll open a chapter of, Cornell in Qatar, whatever it is, and that way you have these universities there and you avoid brain drain. But it also has this other economic influence, right? It has this holding. If you want to know how Qatar is influencing universities, it's not just I give them money and they say what I want. No, they're giving endowments and they're endowing professors. So when you sponsor a professor or a certain fellowship with a specific viewpoint, you change the school's curriculum. And that's honestly what we should be doing.
Does our government know about this?
Yes, our government knows about it. Unfortunately, a lot of the funds weren't reported to the IRS. Which is not surprising. But the donations that have been reported to the IRS are also upwards of $2-3 billion. So the government is aware that all of this is going into the U.S. universities. And it's not just Qatar. Also, China is a very large donor at U.S. academic institutions. So it's, again, you have to take a step back and realize that it's a game of chess. And in a game of chess, you don't focus on one specific move. You're playing the whole board. And if we're focused on one part of the board, you'll never see the true picture. That's why I always tell my friends that are very pro-Israel, like myself, take yourself out of the equation. We're all connected to Israel, but realize this is just another proxy.
Follow the money. I always say follow the money. Follow the money.
Follow the money.
I like that some of my Christian friends have called during this time when this first happened, and they were the first ones to say, by the way, it is against America. It's the Jewish population first. It's anti-democratic, and some people do see the big picture. So
I think it took one moment for America to realize that this is anti-America. I think it was the moment where they, number one, protested the Christmas tree lighting in Rockefeller Center.
Yes.
And number two, when they protested outside the UN and they started tearing down American flags. and people were chanting and cheering.
Death to America.
Death to America.
Death to Israel.
Death to Israel.
Let's go back to you having children.
Oh, yeah.
Would you send them to any of these Ivy League schools? Where are you going to send them to school?
So this is actually one of my takes that is most controversial among my friends. 100% I would send my children to these schools. And the reason why is because I started thinking about what's happening at these schools, right? These horrible things that are happening on college campuses to my friends, to my sisters' friends. You know, these are people I know. And you know, the Cooper Union kids that were trapped inside their library. I went to high school with one of them, and her mom called me saying, Rebecca's stuck inside of Cooper Union's library, and they started sending me the videos live. I said, what is going on here? Why would I send my child there? Because if this is what's happening when we have a seat at the table, what happens when we willingly step out of the room, right? You have to have a foothold. If you decide, let other people decide where a Jew can and cannot feel comfortable, then you're letting anti-Semitism win, right? The whole point.
But Adela, if you're right and Qatar is funding this by billions of dollars, then how does a Jew have a possibility to have a good education? There'll be so much more anti-Semitism in these schools.
Well, this is the issue that I call self-ghettoization, right? The Jewish community has always been united. We've always been strong in numbers, and we've always been different. In every country we've been in host countries, right? The perpetual wandering Jew. It doesn't matter if you were in the Middle East, if you were in Europe. It doesn't matter where you were. For the last 2,000 years, we have been guests in host countries, which means you keep to yourself, you do your job, you go home, and you build your community. And when it becomes dangerous to be Jewish, you either hide it or you leave. That's been our continuous history. So at this point, what I truly believe is that we're not the wandering Jew anymore, right? Because it's not like, where can I be safe in the world? We know where we can be safe. We have Israel. We have a country. We have a foothold. And Israel's existence allows me to be a proud Jew in the diaspora. Because if Israel didn't exist, I would be a scared Jew in the diaspora. Instead, yeah, I might have some fears, but I wouldn't call myself a scared Jew, right? I'm not the Jew with the trembling knees.
Except, just to contradict you for a moment, I read that after October 7th, you went to Turkey and you did not say you were Jewish. You said you were afraid to say you were Jewish. So tell us that. And by the way, Turkey is part of NATO, and this is another issue.
Definitely. So I was in Dubai on October 7th, and there I was afraid. We also took off our Magen Davids. My family said, if anyone asks, we're just Mexican, right? We are all speaking Spanish anyway. You know, you throw in Jesucristo every now and then and Serva Shema Israel, and no one knows, right? And I actually had a friend in Dubai. If you know him, Loai Al-Sharif, he's amazing. He saw that I was in Dubai, and after October 7th, he reached out to me and he said, don't feel afraid. The UAE is a friend of Israel and of the Jews. He drove all the way from Abu Dhabi to Dubai to meet me for coffee, just to tell me that he stands with me and my people. And in the middle of Dubai, he pulled out his phone and he made a video saying, I'm here with Adela, and here it's a safe place for Jews and a safe place for Israel. Adela, how are you feeling? And I said, well, right now I'm feeling great, right? So that was the UAE. I went to Turkey, right? And Turkey was different. Turkey, the day we landed was when pictures on Instagram started circulating of signs on stores in Turkey saying no Jews, right?
No Jews, signs in stores in Turkey, NATO country.
Yes, NATO country. I didn't see them personally, but everyone was saying, aren't you in Turkey right now? I said, yes, I am. We actually left the day that they attacked the Israeli embassy in Turkey. The reason why I took off my Magen David was because I wasn't in the United States. I said, if someone sees this and I trigger the wrong person, I don't know the legal system. I don't know law enforcement. I don't think I'm just going to get punched on a subway. I think that something real is going to happen. And guess what? No one would even know.
Why is that hatred? Where is the hatred from Turkey?
That's a great question. It's interesting because of all the countries, you'd think that Turkey has a little bit more of a level head because they're partially European.
Yes.
But no, unfortunately, Turkey's extremely anti-Israel. I don't know if you heard what happened recently. There's an Israeli soccer player that
I saw that.
Yeah, that plays for a Turkish team. And this Israeli soccer player plays for a Turkish team for years. And after he scored a goal, he just held up his wrist, and he just had October 7th, and then he had 100. It was the 100 days. And he held his hand up like this. He got suspended. And there are articles all read because he was supporting the war in Gaza. But really what he was doing was supporting the return of hostages, right? So it's Turkey has always had this, especially in sports, they've had this history of extreme anti-Israel bias. But yeah, I took off my Magen David, but want to know exactly what happened when I came back to the U.S.? I wasn't wearing this Magen David when I was in Turkey. I was wearing a tiny, very beautiful one similar to yours. As soon as I got back to the U.S., I got the biggest Magen David I could. Because I said, you know what? I'm not in Turkey here. I'm in America, and this is a country where whether or not I agree with everything that's happening, whether or not it's safe or not safe, end of the day, this is a country of laws where people still are beholden to the legal system. I'm in law school, so I very much believe, and I worked at the DA in Queens, at the DA in Brooklyn. I'm a very big believer in the legal system and law enforcement. And I said, okay, if I wear my Magen David here, I might not necessarily be safe, but if something happens to me, if someone hate crimes me on a subway, I'll go on the news, hate crime me, I dare you, because I believe in this legal system. I don't think that something's going to happen like in Turkey. If I'm walking on the street, I trigger the wrong person, that's it, I'm dead. I'm dead, and who knows? It's a very different level of fear.
Explain to our audience, in our government, and in New York particular, we have Nadler, we've got Bloomberg, we've had Schumer. There's so many Jewish leaders. How is it that anti-Semitism could be so severe with these leaders?
It's a great question. I actually interned for Congressman Nadler back when I was in college. I think that when it comes to the Jewish people in the Democratic Party, especially in leadership, I think that there's two types. They're the ones that are just very ideological, and they really just believe in the good of people, right? So I think like with Congressman Nadler, right, he supported the Iran deal, and that was my main qualm before working with him. I'm a college intern. Who am I? I'm no one. But, when I decided to work for him, the one thing that I said I really don't understand if I belong here was his support for the Iran deal. And when I spoke to his staffers about it, well, why did he support this? He said, or the staffers told me that, it's better to, have a deal with Iran. That way we can keep tabs and we could check in and, maybe they'll violate it, but if they violate it, we have a red line, And I said, that's so naive. That's adorable. That's so naive. And, I was a college kid, so who am I to say this to the staffer of a congressman of the United States? But at the end of the day, it's just they really believe that parties are good actors when they're inherently not good actors. And they don't play by fair rules and fairness. And the other half, I think that are lost. I think that the worst thing for a Jew is an anti-Semitic Jew, and that's when you look at the Bernie Sanders of the world, and it's really very sad that they tokenize those voices. If the overwhelming majority of the community is telling you one thing, and then you have a couple of voices that tell you another, maybe you should go with the majority on this one.
Let's switch back to Gaza, because my heart goes out to the civilians and the babies, just as I do. I mean, it's not the civilians' fault. It's not the women, not the children, not the little kids. So do you think Israel's handling that well?
It's a great question. I think it's very difficult. I think that the hard thing was that October 7th caught everyone really off guard. So the regrouping process was very difficult, and decisions were made that once you lose certain momentum, like right now, over 100 days into war, Israel's destroying its PR with every step.
And is it working?
It's a great question. The main, again, I want to just October 7th, actually. I went on a 48-hour mission. They gave us some theories that I don't know if I can share here, that they believe and they have proof of.
Please do.
Well, according to the people who spoke to us from the IDF, they spoke to us in a bunker in Sderot, actually, so that was a fun situation. They were telling us how there was actually a much larger attack that was planned, that was going to take place in the weeks after. And that was going to be a war of annihilation. It was going to be Iran, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, and the West Bank. And it was going to be an all-front war, right? Because you'd have Gaza coming in from one end, West Bank from the other, Hezbollah from the north, Houthis sending rockets from the south, and all of this backed by Iran. They had found the plans after the fact. They knew that this larger attack was brewing, but then Hamas went rogue, and they acted on their own. It's unclear why. Some people say it's because of the Nova Festival that was happening right by their border. They just kind of, it's everything against what they stand for, right? You see women that are wearing, little clothing. They're dancing and raving and, drinking alcohol. And it's all these things that are just so inflammatory to the
and they were taking
Islamist fundamentalists and taking drugs. So they say that this is basically Hamas saying they want to push it up. Iran said, absolutely not. We have this plan. And who knows what the back and forth is. It sounds like a plot of Fauda, honestly. And then at one point, Hamas said, you know what, if we just go and we do this and we just start now and we attack, they're just going to have to push forward their plans too. Hezbollah's going to have to come in and Iran's going to have to come in and the Houthis are going to come in. And, maybe they said, don't accelerate the timeline. But if we accelerate it, what are they going to do? Just leave us hanging? And that's exactly what happened. They accelerated the timeline. They started taking civilian hostages, which was not part of the original plan. It was supposed to be a war of annihilation that was going to be a military tactic. It was not supposed to be a hostage, hold them for leverage situation that feels more guerrilla than anything else. And Hamas acted rogue, and Iran basically said, you're on your own. And that's why Hezbollah started to come in, and then they pulled back because it was just kind of everyone said, well, Hamas is doing it. Are we doing it? And Iran said, no, you're on your own. So
think they'll do it now?
No, because there's too many eyes. There's too many eyes, and that's actually why Iran, I don't know if you remember, in the first couple of weeks after the war, Iran was a talking point. And then Iran kind of faded into the background, and Qatar stepped in. Why? Because they left a vacuum. Once Iran told Hamas, hey, you're on your own here. You messed up the plan.
Look what's happening in the Red Sea.
Exactly. That's actually the perfect example. So it's one of those things that, what happened, some theories say was going to be a much larger attack. No one saw this coming. But the second, which is not a theory, this is strongly what I believe. Why was the response time so slow, and why was it so hard to formulate, a plan even 3-4 days after October 7th? Is because Israel isn't the United States. It's not a giant country, right? It's not Manhattan where
it's the size of Brooklyn.
It's the size. It's the size of New Jersey. It's really tiny, right? Which means that at 6:30 a.m. when Hamas starts attacking, the same people who are in the government are the same people who are in the military, who are the same people who are in their homes, who are the same people who are running to their bases to get weapons. Every single person who was running to their base so they can hop into action was also checking their phone to see whether their WhatsApp message was delivered to their loved ones. Every single person in the country. Every single person. It's not like, 9/11 was Manhattan, but then they started bringing in firefighters from Connecticut, firefighters from New Jersey. Everyone just started coming in. But that's not what happened in Israel. In Israel, it was the whole country. The very people who are supposed to be springing into action were also the people who were making sure their family was alive, right? It was something where the entirety of the country was affected. And if you talk to anyone in Israel, they'll tell you that too. My friends that had to wake up at 6 a.m. and go to their bases and grab their weapons, they said that, on top of that, they're like, do I go north to my base or do I go south to my family? Do I go here? And it was just kind of this moment of chaos. And that's why also for days it was very hard. We didn't even know how many hostages they had. Want to know how they determined how many hostages? Because they had to keep finding the bodies that were burnt alive so they could piece them together and identify them so they can see if someone was missing or dead. That's how we know how many hostages are still there.
There's going to be a lot of mental health issues after this for every Israeli.
It's going to be a lot of mental health issues. And actually, I have a friend, really good friend, who came back last night after 100 days of war. And it's hard. You listen to his stories. He'll tell you that he was stationed in the West Bank. They stopped a car that had over 15 grenades that was heading towards Jerusalem. And that's West Bank. That's not even Gaza. People don't understand what's actually happening.
Explain to our audience, Adela, and this is chilling. Explain to why are the Palestinians backing Hamas? Because it's not the Palestinians. Hamas is a terrorist organization. We get that. But the average civilian, the innocent people in Hamas, it's not their fault. Excuse me.
And it's an anonymous hotline where people can call in and they can speak freely. And a lot of them are just calling for an end to this, right? So there are those voices. I think that the issue really is always, and this brings me back to college campuses, the issue is always going to be indoctrination, right? You find kids' puzzles, kids' textbooks that just talk about, getting rid of the Jews from Israel, right? Like we have like the Juden-free word from the Nazis, like that appears in Palestinian children's books. You want this to be a Jew-free land. So when, if you talk about the disengagement from Gaza was 2005, right? You want to talk the Intifada, 1998, right? So if you look at those 20 years, who are the military fighting age people right now? Who are the 19-year-old boys?
Well, I personally, for whatever it's worth here on the Miller Report, I don't think that Israel's winning. And I think that you're going to have generations of angry people, and do you think there should be a ceasefire?
Ceasefire for the return of the hostages, but even then, what's the next step, right? So, like I think that everyone's thinking very immediate, and no one's thinking about, well, what's the next step, right? I think that when it comes to ceasefire is it's a non-starter in terms of Hamas has to cease fire, right? If you don't want Israel to keep retaliating, you have to cease fire. And actually, this brings me back to New York specifically. On October 8th, before any sort of Israeli retaliation, there was a giant mass protest. I wouldn't even call it a protest, a mass celebration in Times Square hosted by Palestinian supporters. And they stood there and they made speeches talking about the heroic resistance on October 8th. And then Israel retaliated. And actually, I don't know if you know Dr. Sheila Nazarian. She is wonderful. She lives out in LA also. She's big on Instagram. And she had posted on October 8th, she said, if you're not posting about October 7th now, and you don't acknowledge the horrors that Hamas committed in Israel, then don't open your mouth when Israel retaliates, because it will. And here's the thing. Israel didn't retaliate. Israel defended itself. There's a difference. Retaliation comes with a sense of vengefulness. There is nothing vengeful about Israel's defense. This is Israel doing the absolute bare minimum. The bare minimum is return our hostages. That is the bare minimum, saying like, oh, we are open to going back to the status quo.
But they're killing innocent people.
They're killing innocent people.
They're not getting the hostages back. And by the way, the leaders are probably not even in Gaza. They're probably in Turkey.
Turkey or Qatar, either of the two.
So what are we accomplishing?
Nothing. We're destroying our PR. We're tanking our PR, and we're creating another generation of angry Palestinians. And again, the hard thing is that as connected as I am to the cause, and as much as I like to comment on these things, and I do reading, everything I read, Reuters, MSNBC, Al Jazeera. I love reading Al Jazeera because I get all the perspectives. Right. As much as I do the work, I don't live in Israel. I never lived in Israel. I wasn't in the military, and I have no children in the military. So I am not one to say what Israel deems and doesn't deem appropriate at this moment. The only thing that I can do is opine on what I think they should do, but in no way.
Which is what? Share with us.
If you ask me, I think that Hamas has to stop. If Hamas doesn't stop firing, then it doesn't matter what happens. And Israel can continue to do whatever they want to do if Hamas doesn't stop. Once Hamas stops firing and we do get the hostages back, then it's demilitarization. It's putting the
two-state solution?
It's not exactly a two-state solution. It's more of, because the West Bank is what I'm most afraid of right now, right? Because what to do with Gaza, we could, like, the easy solution is to essentially place the West Bank in charge of Gaza, right? Take the PA, which has a UN entity, which is somewhat beholden to the public eye and the international accountability to an extent. Take the PA, put the PA in charge of the West Bank, of Gaza. And once you have the PA and Gaza, then at least you have a bargaining partner of sorts. Gazans can't run rogue because, the West Bank gets beholden to international pressure somewhat. That's the easy solution. But what scares me is that, again, this naivety that Democrats have of people are good actors, right? If the West Bank and the PA aren't good actors, then we're going to give them another powder keg, and we're putting them on either side of Israel where they can easily come in. So I don't know. I'm kind of stuck.
We're going to be in World War III from this conversation.
Well, I hope not.
I hope not. So my last question to you, Adela. So this UN and all of the Hamas leaders that are in the UN, talk to us about that.
Yeah, so the UN is a joke entity. I can tell you when I was younger, much younger, when I was, 17, 18, coming into college, so excited. My goal was to work for the United Nations. Two years straight. And my first year, I walked out of there fired up. I said, wow, amazing. I met youth from every single country. And my friend's Pakistani, and my friend is here. And then we sat down and we talked about development and sustainability. And I had so many...
passion.
Yeah. I felt like, wow, the world is so sweet and united. And like, I spoke to one girl, Uyghur Muslim from China, and she does a lot of public speaking about the Uyghur genocide. And she's someone who wouldn't, right now, like I'm seeing what she's posted, she does not support Israel. She does not. But in that moment, she was speaking up against extremism, number one, extremism against the minority religious community. I said, wow, I could totally relate to that, So I made these friends. And I came back the next year and we had the same conversation again and again and again. And I realized that the United Nations is just a group of people talking in circles, wasting billions and billions and billions of dollars. That's all the UN is. The UN is a joke. South Africa's complaint that they brought against Israel for committing genocide is a joke. Half the countries who are supporting the complaint are committing genocides themselves, and that's why it's a joke. So you're saying
Donald Trump was right?
Donald Trump was 100% right. 100% right. But I will say, and this is similar to my take on college campuses and why we have to be there, we can't just discount the UN, right? The UN does exist. We have to have a foothold. We can disagree with everything they say. We could be the only nay voter on every resolution. But at the end of the day, we have to exist as part of it. And people say, well, existing as part of the United Nations, isn't that legitimizing it? Sure. To an extent, sure. But at the end of the day, it's legitimized by everyone else. You might as well get your mouthpiece in. And that's actually bring this back to student government. When I was on student government, I was the only representative being vocal about anti-Semitism and BDS. And, speaking up against that resolution was really scary. I said, why am I even here? And I thought about it and I said, you know what? I don't even need to be here. And I left student government and they filled my position with an anti-Zionist Jew. And then when it came to the next BDS resolution, guess who was speaking up for us? Literally no one.
So Adela, how do we turn the tide?
How do we turn the tide? That's a very, very big question, and it doesn't have a single answer. When it comes to college campuses, it's about time that we take a page from Qatar's book, and that is sponsoring professors, endowing professors. Professor for Holocaust Studies, professor for anti-Semitism studies, professor for social cultural analysis of the Middle Eastern studies, Israel's existence within the Middle Eastern studies, right? Because again, like I said, when you endow professors, you change the curriculum. When you are 18 years old and you show up to college, what your professor says is law. You're not going to contradict a professor. Right. He studied. He has doctorates, right? So it's about time that we start putting that out there, because what I saw at NYU was Jewish professors who never got involved in the political realm or on the student realm. So when all those professors signed on to BDS, I spoke to Jewish professors and I said, okay, we're being attacked by all these professors who are boycotting Israeli academics. Can you come out with a statement of support for the Jewish students? And all the Jewish professors at NYU, Skirball Center for Judaic Studies, Taub Center for Israel Studies, we have a Center for Israel Studies. All of them said, no, we don't get involved on, campus politics. So number one, it's about time that we start getting involved in campus politics. Again, the Jew of the past, because we lived in, as host communities, we did our jobs, came back home to our communities, right? That's how we've always been. We keep to ourselves. It's about time that we start actually putting our foot down, number one. Number two, it's about time we start sponsoring professors that teach specific content. Sponsor a professor for anti-Semitic studies. It's about time that we start doing that. And those professors have to not be afraid of the Gen Z student. Gen Z students, they read the Spark Notes, they read the summaries, and then they show up ready to debate you on a book they didn't read. That's their attitude. So we have to start putting the right content out there. So that's how you change college campuses. And also, when you speak to people in admissions are tired of this. They privileged activism over academics. The kinds of students that they accepted are the kinds of students that occupy their libraries. It's the same thing as fracking. There's always the same thing, and there were always a fringe group, but now every student they're accepting is the kind of student who occupies a building and disrupts their classes. And guess what? Those are also the students who will never give a single dollar to the institution when they graduate, and odds are they're not going to have jobs. So it's one of those things that people in admissions are saying, wow, maybe we've approached this wrong. They're tired. They're exhausted of the activist type. So that's at least one thing that's turning. Now, when it comes to the United States, when it comes to world politics, those are much larger questions. But I think that it's all going to have to start with the next generation, because the generation that's on their way out, what else can they do? If you're going to, even if right now we have a red election, right? If Trump comes in, if we don't start getting young, moderate Republican voices to speak up that are positing themselves for the next election cycle, the next election cycle is gone too. So I think it starts, I hate to say it starts in the home, but it starts in the home.
And the schools.
And you have to get them
like
young.
You.
Oh, hopefully.
Thank you.
Hopefully.
Well, thank you for coming on the Miller Report. This was fantastic, and I hope a lot of people are listening. We're going to post this. We're going to boost this. We're going to hope it goes viral. Thank you so much for coming on the Miller Report. Wow.
Great.
Fun? Good time.
So
different,
Dom,
not real estate.
No, I was thinking about, because I went to NYU too, but it was 100 years ago.
What school?
I was reflecting on that. And I grew up in the city.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see, in reflection, how it evolved to where it is, and where it was for you, and where it actually is now.
Mm-hmm.
After October. And it was upsetting, because I reflect back on the air quote tolerance that fostered a lot of that babied a lot of that.
Yeah. The safe spaces that are very unsafe for anyone who isn't.
But you're not Jewish, so how would you even figure that out?
I grew up on the Upper West Side.
So you noticed it even though you were in the school?
Actually, if we're still rolling, if you want a little fun anecdote, and actually I was going to bring this in, I forgot. I was a Middle Eastern Studies major, and I took a modern Middle East class, and my professor, I looked at the syllabus. I saw weeks 12 and 13 were Israel-Palestine. I said, great, I'm going to be public enemy number one. But I didn't even have to get there because on week 4, we did our 9/11 unit. And the reading was about how Osama bin Laden wasn't a religious extremist. He was actually an engineer. He was a computer engineer. And he used religion to mobilize the masses for social change. So as I'm reading this, I said, but he was a terrorist, right? So I show up to class and I said, we surely will talk about how he was a terrorist. So we talk about it in class, and basically, again, he talks about how he wasn't a religious extremist. He actually wasn't religious himself. He just used it to mobilize it for social change because the people had been so downtrodden, and, you know, this was the breaking point, and he saw the opportunity. And I got to the point that I myself got confused. So I raised my hand and said, but he was a terrorist, right? And my fellow students rolled their eyes. They scoffed, and my professor crossed his arms, and he said, I'm sure some would call him that. And this is less than 50 blocks from the World Trade Center.
What nationality was your professor?
He was Middle Eastern. I think he was Iranian. And it was one of those things that, again, in that moment, I said, I don't even have to get to the Israel-Palestine week. Everyone already thinks I'm a crazy conservative lunatic who's a xenophobe because I asked if Osama bin Laden was a terrorist. I didn't even say he was a terrorist. I asked whether he was a terrorist. And again, this is, like I said, this is so much bigger than Israel and you know, Israel, Iran, Israel, Gaza, Israel, Palestine, however you want to see it. It's not about this.
Adele,
and education is not about this.
What I'm taking from all of this is, again, as we started, as every interview ends up here at the Miller Report, is follow the money.
Follow the
and
money.
If you're really telling me that Qatar is giving billions of dollars to these institutions, and there's only 15 million Jews in the entire world. My parents are Holocaust survivors. So my uncles and aunts were all sent to camps and died. So to me, and that was there was 6 million, and there's only 15 million in the world. How many Arabs and Muslims are there?
1.8 billion.
Okay, so how on earth can Israel survive? Do you think it's possible that Israel will literally be annihilated?
A couple of points on that. Number one, when it comes to statistics, I talk about this a lot when it comes to social media. People always say, you know, we have to do more on social media. I say social media is already a lost battle. Why? Because if there's
TikTok.
Yes. But if there's only, 16 million Jews in the world and there's 1.8 billion Muslims, it means that if only 10% of Muslims in the world posted a single video on Instagram, and every Jew in the world, including grandmothers and babies, posted a single video, we'd be competing 180 million to 16 million. And that's if only 10% of them, right? If every Jew in the world followed a single Instagram account, that would be a 16 million follower account. That's not even 10% of the following of a single Kardashian.
That is chilling.
And that's why it really takes every single, yes, we need every single Jewish voice, but we also need non-Jewish allies. Just like Israel can be very strong, but without the United States.
Christians.
Yes.
I understand
or anyone with a brain, honestly,
right.
to join us in the bandwagon.
But anti-Semitism is up 400%.
Yeah.
400%. So I don't know how you're going to combat this.
So what solutions do we have? When anti-Semitism's up, the two solutions are we flee back home, which is Israel, and we self-ghettoize, and then anti-Semitism rises even more in the world around us until Israel's entirely surrounded by all countries that hate them, including the United States, because we won't have a foothold. Or we stand our ground, we have conversations, we talk to non-Jewish allies and explain why Israel must exist, and we also explain why Jewish people must exist. And it really comes down to the you can use the liberal take, which is, don't all people deserve to feel safe regardless of their creed, right? You could take that approach. Or if you want to take a more conservative approach and say, like, look, end of the day, you're a person, I'm a person. I contribute to society, you contribute to society. Do you want someone who contributes to society or who protests and tears down Israeli and American flags and chants death to America? Who would you rather be here in this country with you, right? So it's using like the logic. We have a shared goal, we have shared values, we have the shared, Abrahamic faith, whatever approach you want to take. But as strong as Israel is and as successful as Jews has been, we can't fall into this false confidence of we're going to be fine. And that's why I'm the stand your ground Jew.
Adela, are you worried about your safety?
My personal safety?
Yeah, by speaking out and being an activist like this?
I used to be. You know what? I get a lot of hate online, but it's mainly from people in Indonesia who are telling me there's a list. It's not hard to find you. Your days are numbered. Your family will feed you to dogs. Yeah, sure. Do your thing. There was a time after I sued NYU. Weirdly enough, it was after I was on stage with Trump. That's where I got my biggest wave of anti-Semitism from the left and from the right. From the left, your typical anti-Zionist things. But from the right, people calling me a Jewess whore that's trying to influence the government because I'm with Trump. I know we can't use that word on air. A Jewess trying to influence the Republican Party and things like that. And honestly, I was more afraid of those because they live in the United States as opposed to, random people in Pakistan
Are you
who hate
still more
me.
afraid of them?
I don't think they know I
far
exist
right
anymore.
Because we know we had the far left, far right.
Yeah, the far left, far right.
Democrat and Republican. So what are you most afraid of?
Yeah, we have the horseshoe. In terms of my personal physical safety, no, I'm more scared of your subway keffiyeh wearer, because those are the ones that have the least brain. Subway keffiyeh wearer. So you know what a keffiyeh is? It's the Palestinian scarf. All right. There's a lot of people who just like to sit on New York subways and they wear their keffiyeh and they just sit there, and every now and then they start chanting free, free Palestine, and the people around them go free, free, free Palestine. They're on the subways. I take the subway all the time. They're the ones who I really think they're small brain people. They're the ones who would punch a Jew, literally, because they say punch a Nazi. Oh, you're a Nazi. Really, I'm a Jew, but sure. They're the ones who would take physical action, rash physical action, like what I saw at NYU. Have you ever seen a Jewish student burn a Palestinian flag?
No.
Okay.
I've never seen a Jewish person take a hostage either or behead a baby.
Never. Imagine that.
So
yeah.
I get that, but
the alt-right, for some reason, right now at this moment, I'm not afraid of my physical safety because of the alt-right, and maybe it's because I live in Manhattan, and they're just not here.
do you think that you will, if there is no Israel, will you feel safe as an American Jew here in America?
Absolutely not. Number one, well, I'm not an American Jew. I'm a Mexican-Canadian Jew, long story. No, if Israel didn't exist, I'd go back to the wandering Jew that would consider hiding a Magen David even in the streets of New York.
You'd be going to hide in the streets of New York?
Hide my Magen David walking the streets.
Okay.
Because Israel's
I'm sure your registered people know you're Jewish. I mean,
everyone knows I'm Jewish. If Israel didn't exist, that's the moment I would consider taking off my mezuzah or putting on the interior of the door instead of the exterior. Israel's existence is what gives me security in the diaspora. If Israel doesn't exist, it means that any country could turn, right? Like right now, if the U.S. turns...
Back to my question.
Yeah.
Would you feel safe, other than, obviously you're not going to flaunt your Jewishness, but would you feel safe that as an American, well, you're not an American, but being
if
in
I
America,
were an American, yeah.
if there's no Israel?
No. No.
So what would you do? Put a cross on? Hide? What would you do?
I would just hide it. I don't know if I'd go as far as to that's what we did in Turkey, right? We started saying like Jesucristo instead of saying Shema Israel. Like when something happened, we'd be like, hey, Cristo, right? Like because it just makes it easier. You need something to shout out when you're surprised. Instead of saying Shema, we're not going to say Shema. We're going to say Cristo, right? So it's kind of like this hiding thing, but it takes you back to this deep-seated generational trauma. Again, my family wasn't in the Holocaust, thank God. We were in the Inquisition. We could trace back on both sides. Right? If you talk to my grandpa, he left Lebanon. You talk to my aunts, like they would tell you how suddenly, the streets didn't become safe for Jews. Suddenly Jewish buildings and Jewish getting rocks thrown at them, right? And they said like, you had neighbors that were your neighbors for years and suddenly they're not your neighbors, right? I have one aunt that got married. Like the Holocaust.
My mom tells stories that before she was sent away, her neighbors came and started to go through her fur coats and said, you won't be needing this for where you're going. So she had to give away all of her things. So I see and I firsthand, and it's fascinating to me and humbling that your family is not even in the Holocaust and that you're speaking out and you don't have personal experience about this. So thank you.
No, of course. And again, it's just that's one thing I try to talk a lot about, especially when I speak to college kids who aren't Jewish. I try to explain to them that the Holocaust is important, but the Holocaust is one example of why Israel has to exist. Right.
They'll all be gone. They're all about 100.
Yeah.
So there's no books about it.
There's no.
Who's going to talk about it?
No, exactly. And then when you talk to like people from like Iraq, right, the Farhud, that was just like 2 days of Jew hatred and killing. Like let's just have 2 days. Like people just don't even talk about that.
Are there any more Jews in Iraq or
in Iraq? There's a very tiny community.
Syria?
I think it's like 400 people. In Syria, I think the community might be like 15 people. There's like old people. Because again, my family left Lebanon in 1973, but some people stayed behind, right? But there's very few. I think Iran has the largest Jewish community of them. How many? I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. And again, we're not talking about Turkey. Still has a Jewish population. A lot of it are people who are tourists that moved there after the fact, though. Very few that are like native. How are they treated? They don't really flaunt their Jewishness. They're very secular. My tour guide in Turkey was Jewish, and actually that first Friday that we were in Turkey was the Day of Rage. And he said, maybe we shouldn't go to the mosque, this, whatever. But that day, the Day of Rage, after October 7th, I felt safer being in Turkey than in the U.S. because I said, if I'm in Turkey, I know the country is safe, right? No one knows I'm Jewish. I'm just a person in the country. But I actually texted my friends in the U.S. not to walk the streets because I said the entirety of the United States, specifically New York, are a target by Iran, by Qatar, right? And also, we didn't even get to the Shia-Sunni divide, right? Qatar and Iran hate each other, but it's nice to watch them unite over their hatred for Jews. Isn't
they're
that
brothers.
Fun? It's insane.
Common
yeah,
enemies,
we're just
my
cousins, right? So they have
yes, cousins just right.
Yeah, no, it's a whole entire thing. No, I wouldn't feel safe as a Jew in the U.S. if Israel did not exist. Because at that point, what is the U.S.? Right? Again, right now, I have a Mexican passport. I have a Canadian. I always say, if the U.S. turns, I could go north and I can go south. But if there is no Israel and the U.S. turns, I could go north, but the north will turn. I could go south, but the south will turn. Where can I go? Where can I go?